I'm here with Chase Kocher. Hey, Chase, how you doing today?
Doing great, Gary. How are you?
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. Thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. This is, I think, episode 164 of Get a Job in Tech podcast. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I'm based in Austin, Texas. Big tech startup hub here in town. Was born and raised, five brothers. Played college basketball, and after school, kind of found my way into the tech space in a recruiting capacity. So I started Aim4Hire, the company I now operate, about 3 years ago. So we're a tech recruiting company working with software and hardware IoT type companies here in Austin, Texas, as well as Silicon Valley, a bit in New York, and everywhere in between. So big on just recruiting, hiring, offering advice to people, interviewing, and trying to get jobs in tech.
Okay. How did you get started? Are you a tech person? How did you get started in your role as a tech person?
Yeah, to be honest, I was not a tech person. Coming out of college, kind of a business management type degree, and but growing up in the Austin, Texas area, you get exposed to quite a few tech companies, and it being kind of a software hub. So coming out of college, I knew that's the space I wanted to be in. I wanted to be in a disruptive, growing industry, and obviously tech kind of fits that. So I just found a way in more of a sales type kind of capacity, getting into the tech world, and then from there, kind of found a passion for just connecting different parties in the tech world. I kind of realized that I was not going to be a software engineer that revolutionized the game. So I was like, why don't I connect software engineers with prospective companies that are hiring and looking for those kind of top talents. So honestly, just kind of saw an opportunity, started from low-level sales recruiting type role, and kind of just kept moving my way up.
What excites you about your position that you have now?
Really, is just obviously the demand for tech talent kind of keeps growing despite COVID, economic ups and downs. So, I think the demand, but also obviously the influence that tech has in all these different industries that either were early adopters or just now kind of forced to kind of adopt certain technologies over the last couple of years. So I think what excites me is obviously the companies we get to work with and recruit on behalf of, but also the different industries that now are looking for tech talent. It's just about every industry vertical you can really think of. There's demand for hardware, software, different types of engineers. And sometimes, it's retail companies that, maybe a fast food restaurant or something, McDonald's. I mean, since when did you really think of technology when you thought of food? But now there's delivery, there's online. It's just kind of across the board. So I just think it's interesting how, tech continues to grow at a rapid scale. And it's just interesting to see how the talent pool will continue to grow as far as having more and more tech educated type folks in the job market.
Based on your experience and what you see, as a whole holistic view, if you will, what advice would you give someone working at, say, like McDonald's or a Walmart, trying to get into and trying to get a job in tech, their entry level tech job?
Yeah. I think when it comes to anything, I mean, research and trying to develop a network of people that might be in a industry that you're not. I think we're a connected world, right? Utilizing social media, utilizing a LinkedIn or something like that to connect with people that maybe they're not like-minded yet, or maybe they're in a job that you potentially would want to join, like an entry-level type tech job. So trying to find those people either in your friend network or outside of that network that made that jump, and obviously kind of trying to pick their brain on how did they get from working at McDonald's into an IT type role. I imagine a lot of it could consist of getting an associate's degree or going to some type of academy to get that kind of education. But those often cost money, so I think it's really it really kind of leans on research and seeing what other people have done to make that transition. Because between Reddit and every other outlet online, you know, you can find another person that was like you that made the jump. You just have to kind of take the time to read up and then try to do your best to obviously put yourself in that same position.
So I myself have been on lots of interviews or whatever, and I always interview no matter what. Doesn't matter. I always go to interviews. I always put my resume out there all the time, just so I can stay competitive. Basically, what I find for me, and maybe a lot of the listeners do, when I have my resume is like a page or 2 pages, and they say, "Do you know this?" And I say, "Well, I don't know that," and then they can change it. I really don't know that. And in tech, I have to know, it's kind of hard to know what to, what to do. So for instance, talk about, okay, a couple different job positions, right? A network administrator, talk about the entry level for a network administrator and say a system administrator and say a software developer. Those three, can you hit on those, like the entry level, what they would need?
Sure. I certainly can speak to the sysadmin and the software range as far as what those needs are on the network side. Yeah, my knowledge probably isn't as high level as yours is in that regard. I know, when it comes to, college degrees, I think as you probably have experienced, have become less and less important. I think for those entry level jobs now, certainly some companies, depending on how archaic their recruiting departments are, they might still follow the same, like only looking for bachelor degree type people. But I feel like those more advanced tech companies and those ones that kind of see past that, let go of that requirement and look more at, do you have a GitHub account? Do you have any samples of work? Do you have your own kind of personal website that exists, that has your resume, but also maybe has some information on some projects that you've taken on? I think if you're entry level, you don't have a track record yet of working at a company. So even when we are talking about earlier being that kind of retail worker looking to crack in, I think you want to find ways to display how you've kind of put your best foot forward and you've done work outside of your job to try to kind of learn and position yourself to make a jump into tech. Um, but I think for software engineers, GitHub's a huge one. I mean, obviously, kind of have a repository that show outlets, shows your skills. Um, but then I think on the other side, system admins, things of that nature, you want to use your network. Um, and if you don't have a network, I think it's, you can go on LinkedIn and think about a tech company in your neighborhood. Maybe it's Dell, maybe it's Google, whatever it is. Um, you can go on LinkedIn and look at every system admin at Google in St. Louis or in Austin, Texas. Send them a connection by, it's just like adding a friend on Facebook, and you can drop them a line of just like, hey, you want to grab coffee or lunch? You just want to kind of learn how to potentially get in, at Google, or how can I best position myself to get a job like yours? Um, I think inherently people are pretty friendly and appreciate when someone wants to know what their background's like, how they got to where they are. I think that's the cool part about tech is it tends to kind of be, yeah, everybody tends to look out for each other if you're willing to make the effort to try to understand them and understand their career and how maybe they can help you.
For jobs, say, I've experienced this myself where, and I'm sure the audience is as well, where you go in and they say, okay, you're sysadmin or a software person, and they say, well, do you know C++ or Java or whatever? And then you know it. On the phone, you're talking to, say, like a recruiter, but they don't know it, but they're not able to pass you to the next step because you can't demonstrate it to them. And so some of those people I can show you how to do it. And if you need me there on a Friday and it needs to be done, I can do it, no problem. But I can't explain it to you in word speak, basically. Can you, those type of people, I'm finding, can you add a little bit about how you would approach that as a
Hmm. That's a great one. I think that's the biggest caveat, or probably like the biggest stereotype of like recruiters, and frankly, in a lot of ways, they deserve it. Is like they don't understand, they understand tech, software, hardware as just keywords. C++, whatever it is that it's very surface level as far as what their understanding is. So I think a lot of those entry level questions, depending on how big the company is, they're so basic, and if it's hard for you to kind of explain how you would utilize C++ in that instance, I think it makes it incredibly difficult for someone that's trying to interview with these companies. So I understand the frustration. I mean, I think my suggestion is just, if you can't explain it, finding a direct correlation between an instance in which you use C++ that like benefited your current situation or your current company, or you were working on a major project. So instead of just saying like, yeah, I do have experience with that, and let's answer the general 21 questions game, maybe you can actually give a detailed example of like, this is how I use C++ in my current job to better enhance, this application, or this middleware. I think that's where, when you don't know how to maybe answer some generic question, you find a way to answer it in a way that, like, giving an example of how you used it versus the exact ways you use it.
Oh, that's
Is
great.
that helpful? Have you ever tried that? I don't know if that was a good answer.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I love it. Yeah, that's great.
I think it's like, to me, as a, playing basketball in college, it's like, how do you dribble? And it's like, I know how to dribble and shoot, but I can't really explain like how you dribble. You have to use your hand and whatever. It's kind of like, I don't know. I like to just, I think that also is when you have a resume, or when you have something that displays some of the work you have, you can kind of point to that to a recruiter. Because at the end of the day, the recruiter's not going to be able to look at your GitHub repo and be like, oh wow, you're a great coder. They aren't going to have that technical language. So I think really they're just the gatekeeper. So some of those questions are just weed out questions. So I think you want to be careful, like answering some of the cultural ones. Like, do you care about work-life balance? And it's like, of course I do. But so, the recruiter might be trained to look for somebody that's going to be working a lot of hours. So if they say yes to the work-life balance, then don't put them to the next stage, So I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts there.
Yeah, that makes sense, actually. Interesting you say that. I don't know, a lot of people are talking about it, but I would think that this is a prevalent thing. Or someone has extra time. They're working in an IT job, maybe they work from home, and they want a second job. So I've actually had experience with this. I used to work at Amazon as a package handler. So I had a job, and then I had an Amazon job. And it would be really nice to have, say, a second job that pays just as much. And how does that work with recruiters and all that stuff? I know maybe they're not, wanting to hire people like that, but if you only get paid for 8 hours, let's say, then you talk me through that. What's the typical? What would you not say? And what would you say if you're talking to your recruiter? Like, hey, I have a job already. I just want this as a second job.
Yeah, that's a great question. We've run across that a couple of times. I think, if the job that you're applying to or that you're interviewing for, if it is a contract, if it is an 8-hour-a-week contract or whatever it is, I think versus if you're interviewing for a full-time 40-hour-a-week position, where you're going to be paid a base salary, like I would be very careful if you're interviewing for a full-time base salary type position to talk about how you also like intend on working another job. That might freak some companies out. But I would say, like, especially as a consultant or a contractor, I don't know honestly, I don't know what the right answer is as far as like, should you be upfront and just kind of share with them that you intend on working other jobs? I mean, I think that's completely acceptable for a contractor, even if it's like a 40 hour a week type contract that you're taking on. I think as long as you're committing those exact number of hours, they don't really care about anything else. But it's a good point you bring up as far as like a recruiter might be a little taken back if you kind of talk about all the other contracts you're working besides just theirs, because everybody wants to feel like theirs is the most important.
What would you do your resume? How would you say, like, you put in, would you put like company confidential when you're applying at another job? Because you don't want them to find out that you already have a job, but you want to secure a second job. Say it's 8 hours and then, hey, I'm off at 5, and then from 5 on, I'm free. So I want this second shift job. Well, what would you put in your resume so that it doesn't kind of, put any red flags or whatever?
That's a good question. I would say, I think honesty can be the best policy. I think, if you're committed from 8 to 5, but you're looking for a job that's 6 to 9 p.m. or whatever that is, yeah, I don't see, as long as that lines up with the job you're applying to, I don't see any problem with kind of just saying that from 8 to 5 you're working, you can have your resume reflect that you're currently working a job, but maybe you specify the hours in your resume that you're working 8 a.m. Central to 5 p.m. Central, Monday through Friday. I think probably the greatest concern is if they're going to be, we see it quite a lot is with people that will take on like full-time jobs, but they also still want to kind of have their own, app agency where they're on the side, they're able to kind of create their own apps and sell it to whoever they like. But some companies get territorial and kind of like that's their proprietary, that should be part of their ownership. So I think, I think with your resume, like kind of being straightforward with how many hours you're working in your current role. Maybe you have a cover letter, or maybe you attach something with your application that kind of specifies that you're currently working X number of hours at this company, but you intend on having another job on top of that. That might help the recruiter kind of understand that you'd still want to keep your current job, but you're just looking to add an additional job on top of that.
I wanted to ask, if a company can hire me, let's say, but they'll hire you to find me, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the benefit in that versus them hiring me directly, or they have an HR, or their manager has a bunch of resumes, and what's the benefit? What is the benefit, like a Tech Systems or one of those type of companies? What's the benefit in that?
Yeah. I think when it comes to like the bigger, especially the big recruiting staffing firms, which they traditionally work with like the bigger companies, like kind of, that are hiring thousands of people a year. Speed is one thing that a company would get out of using, a big recruiting agency, is that, Tech Systems has a giant database of resumes and people's information that they're always talking to. So if you're a hiring manager and you're like, hey, I need this, my best engineer just quit, and I need to find someone to fill his spot in 2 weeks. Like, maybe we open a job online, but we also go to Tech Systems or Insight Global or one of them, and we ask them to also recruit on the role. So that way it's just kind of a different funnel of talent coming in. And it's really just the network that those big recruiting firms have built, and like the people that they could get in touch with right off the bat. For us, like we're more of a boutique recruiting firm, so we work with kind of companies that aren't enterprise size, like they're smaller. So in a lot of cases, you probably haven't heard of any of the companies we work with because they're kind of like up and coming. So they would hire us to kind of almost in one way to spread the word on their brand and kind of build brand reputation amongst the talent pool. So we would go out to kind of top tech talent and kind of educate them on who this company is and that they're hiring, and why that might be compelling for that person to go join them. But slightly off track there, but the big recruiting firms, you really go to them for speed. You go to them for volume of resumes and candidates, just to give you more options. And then in some cases, you have such a good, those recruiters build relationships with managers. So if that manager trusts that recruiter to go out and find him or her the best people, they're going to start kind of leaning on that recruiter to go out and find them. Whereas if you just post a job online, and then you never know who's going to apply, right? And sometimes you get like 150 applicants, and does that hiring manager want to go through all of those, or would he rather just lean on a Tech Systems to kind of do all the phone screening and vet out the good ones and then send them the best ones?
Do they ever do any personality? Almost, you were a college basketball star. Obviously, right? NBA, probably credentials, draft, all that stuff.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm assuming, right? So I've heard there's some tells there's a tell that somebody's body language when you go play basketball. Is that the same thing in recruiting? Do they have like a tell where there's certain things you can see in a candidate, having seen like 1,000 people or whatever? Is that something that you see?
For sure. Yeah. I think there's, you know, recruiters, especially when they're dealing with, when they do this all day, right? I mean, that's they're looking through resumes and LinkedIn profiles all day. There are certain things that are going to stand out. There are certain things that are going to be red flags. There are going to be certain things that are going to be like, wow, this candidate's perfect. In a lot of cases, those recruiters, they have a job description, they have maybe a couple notes from the hiring manager on what they're looking for. But outside of that, it's kind of up to the recruiter to find, like, just based off their knowledge of working with that hiring manager, like what they're looking for. I think, if it's a contract type role, then your tenure doesn't matter as much. I mean, if you have a history of, quote unquote job hopping, or you've been in multiple roles, that isn't as big of a deal for a contract type position. But let's say it's a salary full-time position, sometimes that if your resume shows that you've had 8 jobs over the last 6 years, like that could be considered a red flag or a tell that that's not a good thing. And that's not fair across the board, because obviously, usually there's a lot of situations that are out of the candidate's control. But that's just one of, like, kind of one that I think some recruiters probably put too much weight on. The other is industry, the same side. They're looking at a resume's background, and like, are you just saying like you're maintaining your like, if your job, let's say your profile just talks about, I maintain this system, I maintain that, like I think you want to kind of look more for action verbs on your resume, to where like, I built this, or I took the initiative to do that. I completed this. I think, like, sometimes the resumes are so vague, that, I think there's some benefits to kind of going into detail, so your resume does stand out a little bit from the 1,000 other people that are applying for that same job. So I would just consider kind of, how you can differentiate the way your profile looks. Having a LinkedIn profile really it gives you more personality than just a sheet of paper that has, your resume on it. I think having a picture, having kind of like seeing who you're connected to, like, I think those things kind of also give you a little more, it gives it a little more flavor, I guess. And, if someone has a LinkedIn and a resume, recruiters definitely look for that as well. Which is weird, but it's just kind of something I've noticed.
What type of are there any websites out there like a Grammarly, let's say, that says, take the resume and say, nope, make it look like, or some AI, let's say, that changes it? Do they have something like that out there?
Yeah, I think, I know Grammarly. There are a couple AIs out there. I don't know any off the top of my head that would kind of help with resume writing per se. Um, I do think, yeah, as simple as like highlighting a verb and right clicking on it and looking at synonyms, or just kind of re-looking at your resume and just thinking about, like, you know, step away from your resume for a second and be like, if I was a manager reading my resume, like, what does this tell me about you? Um, and I think too often, like, since resumes are so archaic, you just kind of like jot down, I did this, I did that, I did that, I did that, and that's it. Um, I think it's important to kind of stop and think about, how you want to describe your job. But I would always kind of try to highlight, what did you achieve, or what were some projects that you worked on that you feel like, you know, were hard, but you were able to, find something out from that. I think it's just, hugely important to try to have your resume stand out. Um, the other thing is, I think, recruiters, like we were talking about earlier, like, recruiting firms tend to look for keywords. So they're searching on LinkedIn, they're searching on Indeed, Monster, all those things, and they're looking for, let's say you're applying for a network admin, like, they want to see what type of networking skill certifications you might have. So when they're looking through thousands of candidates, you want to make sure that yours is one of the ones that kind of pops up to the top, right? So I think you always, you don't want to put every keyword in the book on your resume, but you do want to be, I think, cognizant of like including, if it's whatever the skill or whatever hardware, whatever tools you were using, you're documenting those on your resume as well.
Is there like with the IT, let's say the IT manager, they've worked at the job for say 20 years and they're just there. So they're kind of out of the whole how to hire people basically. They just work there. And
Yeah.
they don't have to hire. But so anyway, when they go to hire somebody, well, they have this old archaic, let's say 10-year-old job description. Does companies like yours say, hey, let me update this. This is what you're really looking for. Is that what you do as well? Or is that what a recruiter does as well?
In some cases, yes. In other cases, I think the recruiter just does whatever they're told to do. So I think some of the managers have maybe been doing it the same way for 20 years. They might get stuck getting, either not getting a lot of candidates for their role or getting ones that have also been working in the same type of role for 20 years and haven't really updated their skills either. It doesn't really help to advance the technology of the company they work at. But I think recruiters sometimes will make suggestions on like, there's a lot of people out there with this skill set, but there's not as many out there with this skill set. Like, would you be willing to consider someone that maybe doesn't have a certification, but they have 3 years of work experience so I think usually there is a communication between the recruiter and the hiring manager of like, how can we make this job attractive? How can we find the right people? But also, it's not just the job being attractive, I guess, because if they're looking for something like that's really outdated, that might just be what they need. They might not be interested in someone that has more modern, to-date kind of tech skills, which is weird, but I guess that's kind of how it goes that's why hiring managers are so fickle. It's like if you have certain ones that are set in their ways and want to keep using the same technology that got them to where they are, then, it's kind of their decision, unfortunately, in a lot of cases.
I'm curious about how that works. Do you recruit for overseas jobs too, for say like Qatar, Dubai, places like that at all? Do you have jobs over there?
I do not. No, I do not. We're all in Texas in the US for the most part. Actually, mostly in Texas, but some outside of Texas, but all in the United States.
No, for like the government, U.S. government contracts overseas.
In past jobs, when I started this company 3 years ago, we worked pretty centrally with like companies that are small, like fast growth startup size. In previous jobs, we worked with the bigger enterprise companies, and in those cases, I did some recruiting kind of across the U.S., but it was more so focused on the U.S.
Chase, is there anything else? So how can people contact you, get in contact with you, and all that? What are your socials and all that stuff?
Yeah. So my LinkedIn, as I've kind of alluded to, I spend a lot of time on there. It's just Chase Kocher, Kocher. Our company's called Aim4Hire. So it's the aim, the number 4, hire, HIRE. Yeah, those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me. Or you can go to our website and there's a contact message me page. But we're a team of 20 recruiters in Austin, but we're growing. So I think hopefully, we're going to have more and more opportunities across the U.S. Outside of just, in Texas.
I'd like to thank you very much, Chase, for coming on the podcast, and have yourself a great day.
You too. Thanks for having me.